The wind pressed through Harbor View's empty streets like a slow tide of glass. A single dad stepped into it and saw a small figure move among the bins behind the closed bakery. He thought the night was finished with him. The sight changed that before the clock touched midnight. Jonah Teague locked the side door of the public library and stood for a moment with his keys in his fist. It was 11:43 p.m. on Christmas Eve. The children's room still smelled faintly of paste and pine from the craft hour he had cleaned after his shift. His son Caleb slept 2 blocks away with a neighbor. He wore striped pajamas, a stuffed otter tucked under one arm. He believed his dad would be home before the first bell of Christmas. He crossed the lot with a cardboard box of donated paperbacks, careful on the patches of black ice. The town square sat dark except for the pharmacy sign blinking a tired green. A radio played in a distant apartment, too soft to catch the tune. He had learned to love that kind of quiet because it gave him room to breathe. It also left no excuse not to notice what should not be happening. A small shape hovered in the alley. At first it looked like a dog nosing for warmth. Then the figure reached and sorted with hands too careful for paws. A girl, thin as a reed, lifted the lid of a recycling bin and began to sift. She worked with a method that startled him. No random grab. She checked labels, she held items to the light. She lined a few bottle caps on the curb by color, red to green to gold, as if the order mattered. Jonah set down the box and watched the street in both directions. No adult waited in the shadows. No older brother kept guard. The bakery's string lights hung dead, little bulbs like frozen berries. He felt the familiar tug he tried to ignore on hard nights. He told himself he had rules at work and a promise to his son. He told himself the town had agencies for this. None of those thoughts fit the shape of the child in the cold. He stepped closer with his hands open and his voice steady. He asked if she needed help finding something. The girl flinched and shifted to run. He stopped with space between them so she could choose. Up close, her coat had thrift store seams and one sleeve turned inside out. Her hair stuck under a knit hat that had lost its pom-pom. She did not smell of liquor or smoke. She smelled like old paper and orange peel. She went back to sorting. Not food, not cans. She hunted for flat things, envelopes, programs, cards. She smoothed each piece against her thigh and read in little snatches, lips moving, eyes darting. A library donation sticker flashed under the alley light. Jonah knew the font because he printed it every week. Another sticker showed his own initials in the corner from a December shift. It landed in her keep pile. He spoke again, softer this time, about the stack he had just locked up. She stiffened. Her gaze slid past him to the street, measuring escape routes. Then she reached deeper into the bin and drew up a cracked snow globe with a carousel horse inside. She shook it once. No flakes moved. The base had a strip of tape with jagged handwriting under it. He recognized the tape. It came from the library's lost and found drawer. He had wrapped that tape around a dozen stray things since autumn. The girl hugged the dead globe and stepped back. Her sneakers slipped on ice. The globe thudded to the curb and rolled until it kissed Jonah's boot. He crouched without touching it and saw under the tape a faded return address stamped in purple. The last name matched his, Teague. The sender's line read, Youth-Centered Toy Drive, handwritten in block letters. His breath went thin in his chest. She lifted the globe again and turned away as if she had failed a test only she knew. Jonah felt a line of decision snap tight. If she kept running into the dark, he would lie awake later listening for footsteps that never came. If he reached too fast, she would vanish now, and that would be worse. He chose a third path because of the tape and the name and the way she had sorted the bottle caps like signals. He told her he worked at the building with the warm lights and the craft table. He said she could come with him to search the boxes that had not yet gone out. He pointed with his chin instead of his hands. He stayed still while he said it. She watched him, calculating. She did not nod. She did not bolt. She slid the globe into her coat and followed at a distance that let her turn and run if one thing felt wrong. They walked toward the library as the church clock struck 12, the sound soft as breath. He keyed the back door and let it swing open wide. Heat spilled into the alley. The girl remained on the threshold, small and alert, a figure cut from the night itself. The tape with his name sat between them like a riddle neither had solved. He hoped they would stay for the next chapter of the night because the answers were close and fragile. He asked that they share a moment when someone's small kindness turned a cold evening into a turning point. Warm air pushed from the library doorway like a small mercy. The girl hovered on the threshold, still ready to run. Jonah set his keys on the desk and kept his hands visible. The snow globe sat between them on a stack of December event calendars. He asked her name in a voice that matched the quiet room. She answered in a whisper he could barely hear. Ray, 9 years old. She did not ask for anything. She watched the exits and the windows. She watched his face when he moved. He offered the staff kettle and a clean mug. She nodded once. He set water to boil and placed a wrapped granola bar on the table. She read the label before she touched it. She ate in neat bites as if every crumb required permission. Her backpack held paper treasure, flyers, receipts, envelopes with corners torn clean. She stacked them by stamp color. Purple meant the youth center. Black meant the clinic. Blue meant the school district office 2 towns over. The system sat in her hands like a puzzle she had trained herself to solve. He asked how long she had been out in the cold. She lifted one shoulder. 1 night under the laundromat vent. 1 at the bus shelter near the marina. That meant almost 2 days of trying to stay invisible. His chest tightened at the thought of it. He checked the clock on the wall. It read 12:06 a.m. Ray slid a damp index card across the table. 3 words in block letters filled the center. The sight jolted him. The handwriting matched the labels from the youth center pantry. He recognized the squared E and the way the A leaned left. Evelyn, the director, wrote that way when she hurried through volunteer slips. The words formed a plain instruction: find Teague, library, ask. The card looked handled by small fingers for a long time. Its edges had softened. Its middle held a thumbprint of dirt and something like cinnamon. He understood in one breath that she had not stumbled toward him. She had been following a path set for emergencies. He asked about her mother without pushing. Ray traced the cracked base of the snow globe. She said her mother worked evening cleanups at the event hall near the docks. She said the shifts stretched later this month. She said her mother had not come back after the parade crowd on Thursday. She had waited at the motel until the manager changed the lock at noon. He felt the next choices in a line. He could call the after-hours hotline and send her into the shelter van before dawn. He could send her back into the night with a bag of snacks and a list she couldn't use. Neither felt like safety. The card with his name turned that line into a circle that landed at his feet. He unlocked the staff closet and found a fleece blanket that had lost its checkout tag. He wrote the blanket into the incident log as a transfer. He added his initials and the time, 12:11 a.m. He brought a plastic bin with travel-sized toiletries to the restroom and set clean towels by the sink. He told Ray that she could wash and warm her hands while he made oatmeal. The kettle clicked off. Steam rose thin and sweet. He stirred oats into a paper bowl and carried it slow, 2 hands steady. She cupped it like a lantern. Color returned to her face in small degrees. Her shoulders settled an inch. The snow globe watched from the table, its silent carousel horse fixed in its circle. He texted his neighbor to check on Caleb in case the morning ran long. The reply came fast enough to ease him. Caleb still slept. The otter still tucked just under his chin. Jonah turned off the lobby lights and left only the desk lamp and the string of paper stars over the story corner. Ray made a bed from 2 beanbag chairs under the mural of migrating whales. She tucked her backpack under her head like a pillow she might need to carry. She kept the index card in her hand. He set the snow globe near her reach. He took the first chair by the door and listened for the building's old bones as they shifted and sighed. Questions hummed through the quiet. Why had Evelyn written his name on a child's lifeline? Where had Ray's mother gone after the parade crews cleaned the last confetti? What had the youth center seen that he had missed? He powered down the circulation monitors and rested his palm on the desk to steady his thoughts. He planned the morning in careful steps. He would call the non-emergency line with details. He would call Evelyn. He would make space at home for 2 bowls and a new voice at the table until a safe plan took shape. He believed they would pass this small kindness forward to someone who needed it. They could subscribe to hear more true-to-life lessons told with heart. The library settled into its late-night hush. Pipes ticked behind the walls. The heater breathed in slow, steady waves. Ray slept under the mural with the index card in her fist. Jonah kept one lamp on and wrote a short incident note for the night ledger. He added times and initials so nothing could be misunderstood later. The pen scratched like a metronome for his thoughts. At 12:24 a.m., he sent a careful message to Evelyn. He wrote that Ray was safe and warm at the library. He asked if the card had been part of a safety plan. The reply arrived at 12:31 a.m. It carried relief and urgency. Evelyn wrote that Alma Reyes had asked for a simple plan weeks ago. Alma feared long shifts and bad luck. She chose plain words Ray could remember. Evelyn also wrote that Alma had not signed out after the parade cleanup on Thursday. The youth center had filed a missing person report on Friday. The note ended with a request: keep Ray with you until morning, if possible. Jonah read the lines twice. The tape with his name no longer felt like an accident. It felt like a baton passed in a relay where the runner ahead had disappeared. He looked across the room. Ray stirred and clutched her backpack tighter. The snow globe caught the lamplight and made a faint circle on the table. The carousel horse seemed to wait. He decided to move before exhaustion blurred his judgment. The apartment had a proper shower and clothes that might fit. The library could lock behind them and hold their place in the morning. He texted his neighbor again. He said he would bring a guest home and might need a hand at dawn. The answer came within a minute and landed like a lifeline. The neighbor would keep watch until breakfast. They left by the back alley at 12:47 a.m. The streets lay empty except for a plow whispering along the boulevard. Ray walked one pace behind him, quick and quiet. She kept the index card in her pocket and the globe wrapped in the fleece. He unlocked his building and paused in the stairwell to listen. No voices, no music, only the hum of the boiler and the soft rattle of old windows. He eased the door open at 12:54 a.m. Inside, he turned the kitchen light set to its dimmer. He showed Ray the hooks for coats and the basket for shoes. He kept his voice low because Caleb slept down the hall. He set clean towels on the bathroom counter and opened a new bar of unscented soap. Hot water filled the room with a cloud that smelled like stone and heat. He laid out a soft t-shirt from his running days and a pair of Caleb's knit socks. Ray emerged 10 minutes later with damp hair and pink fingers. The t-shirt hung long but stayed up with a knot at the hip. She folded her old shirt into a neat square and placed it in her bag as if it might become useful again. Jonah warmed milk and stirred in honey. He sliced an apple with the small knife Caleb used for school lunches. He set the plate on the table and waited in the chair beside it. Ray ate slowly, counting bites under her breath, as if that kept the food from vanishing. His phone pulsed on the counter. The non-emergency dispatcher acknowledged his report and attached a file number. The message asked for a morning follow-up with the investigating officer. Another text arrived from Evelyn. She sent a photo of a sign-in sheet from the toy drive earlier in December. In the volunteer box, someone had added a neat arrow to his printed name. A note beside it read, "Trusted contact for night staff." Alma's initials followed in a small loop. The connection landed with weight and clarity. Alma had watched him help a dozen families print forms and fill out applications. She had watched Caleb color quietly under the desk lamp. She had chosen her emergency words with him in mind. He opened the hall closet and pulled a folded foam mat onto the living room floor. A quilt went over it. A second pillow followed. Ray looked at the door once, then at the mat. She nodded and tucked the index card under the pillowcase like a pass to safety. The apartment held the soft sounds of ordinary life. The fridge cycled. A baseboard clicked. Caleb turned in his sleep and rustled the sheets. Jonah stood in the doorway and felt the shape of a decision settle inside him. He would keep Ray with him through the search because Alma had asked in the only way she could. He would meet the officer at first light. He would call Evelyn from the front steps of the station with Ray beside him. He hoped they would stay for the next chapter of the journey. He asked that they leave a comment about a moment when kindness changed a day. Dawn pressed pale light through the blinds. Ray woke with a sharp breath and gripped the index card until her knuckles blanched. Jonah sat up on the couch before she could bolt. He spoke in a steady tone that matched the room. She eased back onto the mat and counted the whales on the mural framed in his hallway. Caleb padded out at 6:18 a.m., hair wild and eyes heavy. He blinked at Ray, then at the snow globe on the table. He asked if she wanted the first turn with the warm socks from the radiator. Ray nodded once. The three of them moved through a quiet routine that felt new and careful. By 7:05 a.m., Jonah had left a note for his neighbor and walked Ray to the station. He handed the file number to the desk sergeant and explained the index card. An officer took their statements and promised a call after the holiday briefing. The word "later" felt like a door closed with a polite smile. They crossed to the youth center as the sky cleared to a thin blue. Evelyn met them with a clipboard and a tight hug that stopped just short of Ray's shoulders. She offered a side room and 2 steaming cups that smelled like cinnamon and tea. Ray stayed close to the table edge where she could see the entrance. Evelyn spread sign-in sheets and a calendar on the table. She pointed to Alma's name written twice in December with the same neat loop in the initials. She said Alma had volunteered for toy sorting and parade cleanup. She said she had left messages with the event hall and the motel and the transit office. Each place reported no news. Ray unpacked her backpack and built a paper landscape. Youth center flyers sat in one stack. Mailing clinic mailers sat in another. She kept the index card alone, like a North Star. The snow globe stood watch over everything. Evelyn's eyes snagged on the globe. She tapped the tape and then the crack that split the base. She said she remembered a globe just like it on the Lost and Found shelf last week. She thought a volunteer had tossed it when the water leaked and the flakes clumped like wet salt. Jonah picked up the globe and turned it in his hands. Something shifted inside the base with a dry rattle. He fetched a small screwdriver from the craft drawer and looked to Ray for permission. She nodded and folded her hands in her lap. He coaxed the base free. A curl of old glue gave way. A thin brass key slid onto the table with a soft ring. It came attached to a red tag stamped with a white number and 2 words, North Pier. A folded receipt lay beneath it. The print read, Harbor View Lockers, with a timestamp from Thursday at 9:42 p.m. The room went still around the clue. Evelyn traced the red tag with her finger and said the North Pier lockers sat under the boardwalk, near the shuttered carousel. Ray leaned in, eyes locked on the horse under the globe. She whispered that her mother had promised a real ride there when the holiday pay cleared. Jonah felt the line of action pull tight. He had a concrete place and a last known time. He had a key that could open something Alma had hidden. He also had a child who had slept on a beanbag chair and still checked every door before she sat. He called the station from the hallway and reported the locker tag. The dispatcher told him a detective would meet him at the pier. The words "safe to proceed" landed like a baton passed back to him. He told Ray that he would go to the pier and that she would stay with Evelyn for warmth and breakfast. Ray stiffened in a flash of panic. He crouched to her level and placed the index card in her palm again. He said she could hold the plan until he returned. She read, "Find Teague, library, ask." She curled her fingers around it like a vow. Evelyn guided Ray to the art table with a tray of markers and a bowl of oatmeal crowned with raisins. Ray ate while watching the doorway with steady eyes. She asked if she could keep the snow globe on the table. Evelyn said yes and moved it within reach. Jonah pulled on his coat and slid the brass key into his pocket. He called his neighbor to confirm Caleb's breakfast and school plan. The answer came through cheerful and sure. Caleb would be fine. He stepped into the brittle winter light and turned toward the waterfront. He passed the bakery with its dark string lights and the pharmacy sign blinking its tired green. The carousel's roof rose ahead like a crown of faded tin. Gulls wheeled above the pier and stitched the sky with thin cries. He believed the next door would open if he reached it with care. She believed they would share the story with someone who needed a reminder that small clues can lead home. Wind tore off the harbor and slid under his collar. Jonah reached the North Pier at 8:26 a.m. A detective in a Navy parka lifted a hand and introduced herself as Maris Singh. She listened while he explained the locker tag and Alma's last shift. They climbed the steps to the boardwalk. The carousel sat shuttered, its painted horses dim under frost. Locker rows lined the wall like a dull piano. Number 27 waited with a red tag and a hairline crack in the paint. The brass key turning with a stiff click. Inside lay a folded denim jacket, a zip pouch, and a paper envelope lettered with a single initial, R. Jonah glanced at the detective. She said he should open it if he was the contact named on the card. He slid out a note written in a careful hand. Alma had written that all long shifts often ended after midnight, and that Ray should ask for the librarian with the quiet voice. She wrote that the youth center trusted him and that Ray could too. She added that Ray should keep sorting the mail by stamp color if things went wrong, because patterns kept her calm. Under the note sat a cracked phone, a bus voucher, and a carousel token taped to a receipt from Harbor View Clinic. The receipt showed Thursday at 8:59 p.m., with the word triage scrawled beside the time. An inhaler, spent to the last hiss, lay at the bottom of the locker. Detective Singh read the clinic line twice. She called the clinic from her radio and asked for any record of Alma Reyes. A nurse said Alma had been seen coughing hard and running a fever. The nurse added that Alma left before full evaluation to make her shift. The clerk remembered calling an ambulance later for a woman who collapsed near the boardwalk. The detective's second call went to the hospital's switchboard. She asked for the intake desk and read Alma's description. A pause stretched thin. Then she repeated the words she heard. A Jane Doe matching Alma had been admitted late Thursday with severe pneumonia and dehydration. She had no ID, only a carousel token and a ripped pocket seam. Jonas steadied his breathing and asked if visitors were allowed. The detective said yes, but the nurses would limit time. She added that the woman was stable this morning. He heard the word stable and felt his shoulders drop an inch. He handed the locker items to the detective for evidence photos. She told him to keep the note and the token for Ray because they were clearly meant for her. He slipped them into the inner pocket of his coat and zipped the pocket closed. They walked back along the boardwalk, past the coin-op, binoculars, and the shuttered taffy stand. Gulls wrestled over a stray fry near a trash can. The carousel roof threw a pale shadow on the snow, like a halo knocked slightly askew. At the youth center, Ray sat at the art table with a box of markers arranged by color. Evelyn rested a hand on the chair back and watched her draw. Ray looked up when Jonah entered and searched his face for the kind of news that knocked breath from lungs. He sat and told her what they had found. He said her mother had gone to the clinic, then collapsed, and now lay at the hospital with nurses watching her breathing. He placed the carousel token in Ray's palm and told her her mother had saved it for a promise. Ray closed her fingers around the token and pressed it to her chest. Evelyn handed her a scarf and a light wool hat. Ray tugged the hat low and asked if she could carry the snow globe. She said the horse should see the real carousel this time. Detective Singh waited by the door and nodded once to signal the car was ready. Jonah called his neighbor to confirm Caleb's pickup after school. The answer came back steady. His neighbor said Caleb would do homework and bake cookies until dinner. They stepped into the brittle sunlight. Ray kept pace with small, determined steps. She walked with her shoulders square and the token held tight. Jonah held the note in his pocket like a compass that only pointed one way. At the hospital doors, warm air billowed against their faces. The automatic glass slid apart with a soft hum. Ray lifted the snow globe as if to guide them forward. Jonah glanced at the clock by the volunteer desk. It read 9:17 a.m. He hoped they would stay for the final part of the search. She believed they would pass a word of encouragement to someone facing a hard morning. The lobby smelled like antiseptic and oranges. A volunteer signed them in and paged the floor nurse. Detective Singh spoke with the charge desk and held the elevator until Ray stepped inside. They reached a quiet wing at 9:28 a.m. Lights glowed low behind frosted glass. A nurse explained that Alma had arrived dehydrated and gasping. She said oxygen had steadied the rhythm and that visitors should keep calm voices. Ray tightened her scarf and tucked the carousel token in her glove. Jonah rested a hand over his coat pocket where the note waited. He told himself to move slowly because this moment would live in the girl's bones. Alma lay propped on pillows with a line at her wrist and a soft mask over her face. Her lashes flickered at the sound of small footsteps. Ray stopped at the bed, near the rail, where she could see without leaning. Jonah placed the snow globe on the tray table. He turned the base so the tiny horse faced the window. He said that Ray had kept the tokens safe and that the locker had given them the path here. Alma's fingers lifted from the blanket with a shaky grace. Ray slid her hand into that space and held still. Alma's shoulders loosened. The machine beside the bed marked a calmer breath. The nurse watched for a minute and nodded. She told them Alma would stay on antibiotics and rest. She asked about safe care for Ray while Alma recovered. Jonah said the youth center had a plan and the library had a couch that folded into a bed. Detective Singh stepped into the hall and called the family liaison. She requested temporary placement with Jonah as emergency caregiver. She added that the youth center would support meals and school pickup. Paperwork would follow at noon. Ray rested her forehead against Alma's sleeve. She whispered something too soft to carry. Alma's lips curved under the mask in an answer only her daughter could hear. Jonah stood back and let the scene breathe. He texted his neighbor with an update. He sent a second message to Evelyn and asked her to bring Ray's favorite markers for later. He felt the knot inside him begin to release. At 10:12 a.m., a counselor came with forms. Her pen scratched through names and times while Jonah signed the lines that made him responsible. She explained the check-ins and the limits. She wrote his number on a card and told Ray she could call any time, day or night. They returned to the room for a final minute. Ray pressed the token into Alma's palm and said they would save the first ride for spring. Alma got it once and closed her fingers around the promise. Jonah guided Ray to the elevator when the nurse raised 2 fingers to mark the end of visiting time. The doors slid shut with a whisper. Ray stood very straight, as if someone taller had lent her their posture. Outside, the winter light felt less sharp. They stopped by the boardwalk on their walk back. The carousel stood quiet under its tin crown. Ray lifted the snow globe and held it toward the painted horses. She said she would show her mother the real lights when the season opened. The next weeks took on a steady pattern. Mornings began with oatmeal and quiet walks to school. Afternoons belonged to art tables and chapter books. Evenings ended under the whale mural with stories that wandered but always found home. Alma gained strength in small, countable steps. 3 days without oxygen, 2 stairs at a time, 1 laugh that sounded like the woman Evelyn remembered from toy drive sign-up.
On discharge day, she waved a folded sheet that listed new care instructions and a follow-up date in blue ink. They met again under the carousel in early spring. The town had strung new bulbs across the eaves. Ray and Alma stood at the ticket booth with the token placed by the window for luck. Jonah watched from a bench with Caleb, who cradled a paper bag of taffy like treasure. Ray chose a horse with a green saddle. Alma chose the one beside it, with a chipped gold stirrup. As the music turned, mother and daughter lifted together and grinned at the same point in the circle. The snow globe sat on Jonah's knee, catching the real flakes of light. He understood then what the index card had really said. It had not only been a map for a lost night, it had been a request to stand in the gap until a family could be whole again. He had answered, and the answer had changed them all. He believed someone listening would pass kindness forward before the next cold night asked for it. They could subscribe to hear more true-to-life lessons told with heart.